In this video, we will talk about equations and some of their properties. Equation is just a statement that two expressions are equal. When you solve an equation, you're looking for a solution, sometimes called a root of the equation. And we often talk about the solution set of the equation, which is just a listing in set notation of all the values that x can take on. A linear equation is an equation in one variable. So there aren't x and y's, and there isn't x to the second power, x to the third power. The degree is 1. Now, there's 3 types of linear equations. We have identities, conditionals, and contradictions. So let's look at the 3 different types here. This is called an identity because the left side of the equation is exactly equal to the right side of the equation. If you were to solve this, you would get the variables subtracting away, and what you'd be left with is a true statement. Often 0 equals 0. A conditional equation is one where you solve and you get a value for x. X is equal to some value, so we call that a condition. This equation is true on the condition that x equals a particular value. The last type of equation is called a contradiction, and it's similar to an identity in that when you solve it, the variable subtracts away, but what you're left with is a false statement. If you look at what's on the screen here, we have x equals x plus 1. What we would do to solve this is subtract x, and what you'd be left with is no x's, they subtracted away, but you'd have 0 equals 1, which is a false statement or a contradiction. So in this example, we're to decide whether the equation is an identity, a conditional equation, or a contradiction. So we solve the equation, and I know we're all familiar with that. And if you notice, the x's are going to subtract away. Now I could stop. Once I subtracted the x's, I would have negative 8 equals negative 8. That's a true statement, but they've gone ahead and added 8 to both sides. And what we see is that 0 equals 0, which is a true statement. Because it's a true statement and the x's have subtracted away, we have an identity. The actual solution set for an identity is all real numbers. So it's not enough to just say it's an identity. We also need to say what values x can take. X can actually be any value here. I can choose any value for x, replace that in my equation, and I will get a true statement. For part B here, I'm to decide again if this is an identity, a conditional equation, or a contradiction. So I solve, and I end up with x being equal to 3. So the statement 5x minus 4 equals 11 is true on the condition that x equals 3. So this is a conditional. Example C here, again, I'm to decide if it's an identity, a conditional equation, or a contradiction. I solve this, and much like our identity, you notice that the 9x subtracts away. And I'm left with the statement negative 3 equals 7, which is clearly false, leading us to conclude this is a contradiction. Now again, like an identity, it's not enough just to conclude it's an identity, or in this case, a contradiction. We also need to say what the solution set is. And in this case, there is no solution. So I can either write the words empty set, or I could write null set, or I could use the symbol 0 with a line through it. Most of the time, the line is kind of a diagonal line, which is different than what they're showing you here. So here's a summary. When you're solving linear equations, if what you get leads to a true statement and your variable has subtracted out, the equation is an identity and the solution set is all real numbers. When you solve a linear equation, if you get a single solution, that's called a conditional. And if, when solving an equation, you subtract your variables, they subtract away, and what you're left with is a false statement, you have a contradiction, and its solution set is the empty set.